This lecture is on the mechanisms of hormone action and on the one messenger model. So, for the mechanisms then of hormone action. Each hormone controls the action of a particular target tissue. And as I have mentioned before, hormones reach all body tissues, but only affect the target tissues. So how does that work? What happens is that the target tissues, for lack of a better term, recognize the hormones that are intended for them. And then hormones also have to have a mechanism for producing their effects. Then, within the target cells. So there are two basic mechanisms governing, that's an E there, governing hormone action. And these are then the one messenger model, and this is mainly characteristic of steroid hormones. And then there is also the 2 messenger model. And this then is characteristic of your protein type hormones. So we're going to talk about the one messenger model now. So your steroid hormones, and remember this is characteristic of steroid hormones then, your steroid hormones are small lipid soluble molecules. We've discussed this before. I'll even do this. I'll do a comma and do it this way. Small lipid soluble molecules which can, therefore, because they are lipid soluble, they can therefore pass through the cell membrane of the target cells. And then within the target cells, there are receptor proteins. And these receptor proteins recognize and react with the hormone, producing a new chemical, so producing an active factor. So they get together and they produce this new chemical called the active factor. And the active factor is the chemical that changes the rate of some chemical reaction within the cell. And I'm even going to make a comma there. Producing then the producing the hormonal effect. So it's the active factor then that actually produces the hormonal effect in various different ways. And this may be done by having the active factor then enter the cell's nucleus and acting on the DNA that controls the cell's activities. So what I'm going to do now is draw you a picture of what this looks like. This is strictly diagrammatic, but I think that it helps. So here we are going to have some endocrine gland or other. Here it is. And then we're going to have a bunch of cells. I'm going to give myself some room here. So here's a cell. Here's a cell. And here's a cell. So this now is a target cell. And these two then are non-target cells. There's one, and there's one. So here's what happens. Let's get some colors working here. So here we have this endocrine gland then making some hormones. And these hormones have a particular shape. And I mean that pretty literally. So these hormones then leave the target cell. And so now here we have steroid hormones in your blood. So here they are. They have left the endocrine gland and they are now in your bloodstream. So proteins are huge molecules and they have shapes. And this is then how protein receptors work. You can think of it like a lock and a key. So you have a lock, and that lock then will prevent a lot of things from happening because you can't go into that room. On the other hand, if you have a key to that lock, then the key plus the lock together will interact, open up the room, and at that point you can do whatever is possible to be done inside that room. Maybe that's where computers are. Maybe that's where musical instruments are. You get the idea. So the point is that you can think of receptor proteins as being like a lock on a door, like a mechanical lock. They have a particular shape. And that shape is very specific, and it then interacts only with a particular key. That has to be both the right kind of substance, and that substance has to be in the right shape. So you have the key and you have the lock, and then together they can change the whole mechanism and then allow whatever can be allowed that way. So as I said, think of these hormones then as little keys, and then inside the target cell you have locks of just the right shape. There we are. So these are protein receptors of the correct type. And here I'm going to draw another protein receptor. But my point is that these steroid hormones, which can just waltz right into a cell, they can just go straight through the cell membrane of the target cell, and once inside, they can combine with the protein receptor, and then this together. Then this is now the active factor, made up of both the receptor protein and the hormone. So the active factor, this then produces the target cells response. Okay, so there we are. Now, of course, these steroid hormones being in the blood go into non-target cells as well. Here they are. But what can happen with your non-target cells is maybe they have no protein receptors at all. That would be unusual, but as I said, there's a possibility. Or they may have protein receptors, but they may be the wrong shape. So then, you're just not going to wind up getting an active factor between this particular hormone and these basically inappropriate protein receptors. These protein receptors are waiting for a different hormone. So anyway, that then is how the one messenger model works. These steroid hormones go into the bloodstream, they enter all the cells because they can go straight through the cell membrane, and then they interact with appropriate protein receptors in the target cells, and together they form the active factor. And it is the active factor then that creates the hormonal effect. And that's the end of this lecture.